I'm Matt. Does anyone have any questions? We'll get to that. If you have a question like on a slide, let me know. Otherwise, there should be plenty of time for some Q&A at the end of the presentation. But feel free to shoot a hand up if it's very relevant at the moment, and we'll see if we can answer it. Otherwise, thanks everyone for coming. I'm Matt Appleman. I own Appleman bicycles in Minneapolis. I've been doing it full-time, frame building, carbon fiber repair, and now more recently the short cranks and regular length cranks for 13 years I started. So yeah, I'm a self-proclaimed crank length evangelist or enthusiast, depending how you want to look at it. But kind of my story is I grew up riding and racing since I was really little. I was always on 172.5 cranks. I'm tall, 6'2". In my first year in college, I had bad overuse knee injury, and I couldn't sit, couldn't walk, couldn't ride without some level of pain. And it took a long time to figure it out. I figured out if I sit way back, like really slack seat tube angle on my frame, my pain got better. So as I graduated, I got a degree in composite materials engineering. So basically carbon fiber bike engineering for like a nerd like me. I had to decide, do I build a bike that fits me, or do I pay a lot of money to have someone build me a custom bike? So I went the build my own route and started experimenting more and more with shorter and shorter cranks. And I got down to 155 millimeter cranks, and my knee pain went away. And I could ride as hard as I wanted and ride as long as I'd wanted, which I couldn't have done for quite a few years up until that point. So kind of between the geometry shift, a little bit of physical therapy, and short cranks, now I'm healthy and I don't have a lot of time to ride, but I can ride however long I can, and that pain's not a limiting factor. So I was riding 155s for probably 7-8 years before I started the crank side of the business, started making short cranks. I thought I'd try 145s just for fun and absolutely loved how it felt. So I've been riding that for a while, and it's very goofy. I'm kind of an physical anomaly, but you don't have to, even tall people can ride short cranks, I guess. So that's kind of where I'm coming at. That's how I arrived at frame building and short cranks. Over the years, building bikes, I would spec short cranks for some of my customers, and they seem to enjoy it, kind of fulfilling a good feedback loop, and eventually kind of learned that I'm onto something, and that kind of spurred me to expand the short crank range that was available. So I have cranks that fit mountain bikes and fat bikes and all different lengths for all different people and all different bikes. It's kind of my history, my crank spiel. So there's kind of two parts to this presentation. One's just kind of a general about crank length, and then also how bike geometry, bike design, frame design can be changed or modified when you can build around different length cranks. So crank length is super weird. It can be very confusing, and it's very emotional for some people. It's ingrained in the industry, and it has been for a long time. There's been a very small variation in crank length, and stems, everything come in huge size ranges, everything except crank length. We'll get to more of that later. So I don't mean to offend you if I you start feeling feelings towards short cranks, I apologize. What can crank length do for you? What improvements can it make? Mostly in the comfort, bike fit department. Most riders will reduce knee pain, hip pain like I had, or just overall feel better because if you're a very small rider, you might be pedaling very large circles unnecessarily. And you can if you do build a bike like I do, custom frames, you can build around crank length and build a much better fitting, riding, handling bike compared to what we have now in kind of stock sizes. So like I said before, frame sizes, handlebar widths, stem lengths, you kind of name it, they come in a pretty wide range, about 25% difference between like a extra small and a large frame. And that pretty well correlates to rider height or inseam or whatever metric you want to use to size people. That seems to get about 25 to 30% range between a really short person and a really tall person. So frames, stems, it all makes sense. Crank length, anyone have a guess what the range of percentage of crank length?
Between 175 and 170, and that's it?
Yeah. That's pretty small.
6%? I'd say less than 5%.
Yeah. Well, I did 165 is fairly common now to 175, and that ends up at 6%, which is just sort of crazy for your cranks like literally move you the most on the bike. Your legs, your feet are moving the most, and that's like the least adjustable or, excuse me, least variable part on your bike. So it's not that 165 or 175s are bad lengths. It's just not really for everyone. Oh, sorry. I think my opinion is that the scale is just kind of all wrong, and that 165s and 175s and all those they're great for tall riders, but they don't really cater to shorter riders very well. And we should have just a much broader range to match that. I suggest like 155 and 165 for most average people. If you're pretty tall or pretty short, maybe 145, 175, depending on what side you're on. And kind of the extremes would be 135, or more than 175, depending how big or small you are. And if you have a T-Rex body, really long legs, short arms, it's kind of what I'm getting at there. So proportional length is kind of what I'm an advocate of, is basically just smaller people should have smaller parts on their bike, and that just sort of makes sense. Taller people should have longer cranks, longer seat posts, bigger frames. Wheels, you name it. I mean, it's all sort of proportional. When you're looking at crank length, the type of riding you're doing, a mountain bike, touring, road racing, whatever, that can also influence crank length for some people. Yeah, a crit rider or a mountain bike, shorter crank's going to reduce pedal strike. There can be, it's a big, nasty, complicated topic. Hopefully we'll straighten some of that out. And also, kind of you as a rider, how flexible you are, how mobile you are, can all affect, if you can't touch your toes and have very limited range of motion, you're not going to want really overly long cranks, whatever length that might be. So the real magic of crank length happens at the top of the pedal stroke. Here, I use bike CAD to make this. So the crank length is changing between 175 and 135. And the little angle-o-meter there is showing that the knee angle is opening up between the shin and the thigh over the top of the pedal stroke. So everything crank length, all the advantages come when the leg is at the top of the pedal stroke.
And the seat height, you raise the seat height when the cranks are shorter to keep everything.
Yes. You want to keep your leg extension the same, or if you measure from at the bottom of the pedal stroke, from the pedal to your saddle, that distance should stay the same whether you're on, whatever crank length you have, assuming your seat height is right.
Yeah, okay.
But that's another topic we won't get into. So this is the knee angle. So kind of the idea is a less flex knee is going to have less stress on it. And that might be where you reduce some pain. The next slide, it shows the hip angle. Kind of the same thing with a bunch of different length cranks and how that hip opens up, or basically your knee to your chest area opens up with shorter cranks. One cool part about if you do, let's say you shorten a crank 10 millimeters, so now you also adjust your seat up 10 millimeters to accommodate that. So now you've just gained from your chest to your knee 20 millimeters, or twice the crank length change. So it has a kind of a doubling effect at the top of the pedal stroke, which is usually very beneficial. So why is the top of the pedal stroke good? Why is that magic? That's because if you're flexing too much, it's harder to get over the top of the pedal stroke. You might have more of a dead spot. You'll be able to produce or start pushing on the pedal sooner, because you're not just if you watch someone who's on really too long of cranks, they'll be like squirming they're hiking up their hips just to get it over the top every pedal stroke.
It seems to me that most riders, they don't spin as fast as they think you should, like say 90 RPMs. So if crank length is too long, it's going to impede your cadence. Is that right? It's going to make it hard to really pedal at the optimum.
It's regardless of cadence, it's just going to make it hard to pedal if your cranks are too long. Whether you're pedaling slow or fast, if you're really struggling to get over the top of that pedal stroke, that there.
And you just read that they say most people should be spinning faster than they are. They're either in too high a gear, maybe, but this exacerbates that problem.
Yeah. There's all sorts of things that can change. Everything is related. You can't change crank length without changing everything else on the bike. Nothing on a frame. A bike is independent. So you change your stem length, and technically everything moves on your body. So, but yeah, that line of thinking, I think we'll get into a little bit more later, and we can, if we have time, we can talk more about cadence and gearing and stuff at the end. But
why doesn't your guy get more spacers as well?
I wanted to keep handlebar height constant, just to minimize what we're changing, just for this example. But that's and we can talk about that at the end of what changes you might want to make as you adjust crank length to your position, if at all.
If at all. Well, the gentleman's gaining reach as the cranks go down, and also saddle bar drop.
Mm-hmm.
If the handlebars stay constant.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. And sometimes that may be desirable. For some people, you might want that. Some people, you might not. It's complicated. It's confusing. There's a lot going on. But yeah, did you have a?
Yeah, do you have like, so for the knees, you have that red, yellow, and green range for knee angle. Do you have that for hip angle as well?
I don't know.
Is there a study that has it?
Not. I found. I've read 45 degrees is a limit. It's also. It's very difficult for the average person to measure hip angle.
It also depends on what landmarks you're using to measure where the spine is.
Knee angle is a little more simple. You can feel, touch your joints and get a little better idea to measure angles. Hip, it kind of depends how your back is. It's where do you measure it? Some people might sit more erect, some might slouch. What's that?
It's not a straight line to the shoulder joint, it's because the back can be curved.
Your back could be in any position, so there might be 20 degrees, and so it's. But the key is maybe not looking at the number of the hip angle, but just that can be a limiting factor. Maybe your knee isn't flexing too much, but maybe you're in a really aggressive arrow position, leaning really far forward. You might,
Or too much setback.
or too much setback is the same thing, or similar thing. You might then again have a hard time getting that leg over just because your torso is, your thighs are hitting your stomach, your thighs are hitting your chest. So I try not to rely too much on the actual number, focus on the number, but more of the function. And if you have a big gut, you might want shorter cranks are going to help open that up, or sitting more upright versus someone with no gut at all. So that's great, but what do short cranks get you? Comfort, mostly, as I said. A lot of times it can help with knee, hip, or low back pain. If you're reaching almost like your saddle's too high, you might be rocking your hips back and forth, either to get over the top or to reach down. So that's moving your spine in every pedal stroke, you're going back and forth, and people can get low back pain from that. Ask any fitter, and they're going to tell you that pelvic stability or hip stability is one of the most important key factors to a good quality, comfortable, powerful position on the bike. And shorter cranks will help calm your hips down and provide. Happy, did you have?
When you're looking at the hip with one joint up and one joint below, look at function rather than at power. Because power, you're just isolating what you're looking at, and you want to see that everything's working together as opposed to in opposition.
Yeah, power is not necessarily a good gauge of a good fit. I think you would agree, Happy. Power is not speed all of the time. Happy, I talk to Happy quite a bit, and he's an advocate. When you're racing, you don't want to produce high power. You want to get to the finish line with as little power as you can. Just as sort of a different perspective in our very power-hungry world that we live in.
With a hip replacement, you're building torquing the joint,
Right.
so you reduce the power.
And in triathlon, you have better runs off the bike with short cranks.
Yeah, that's right. Here, I still need to learn more about that, the triathlon and running side of things. Other advantages that generally come with appropriately sized cranks would be you can breathe easier, you might open up that chest, your legs aren't going to be coming up as close to your stomach or chest every pedal stroke. Maybe you don't need to have a more open chest, but with shorter crank, since your knee is coming up less, you can get into a more aggressive position without consequence. On the mountain bike, crit side of things, or road racing, everywhere, pedal strike is reduced. You're lifting the pedals further from the ground.
You can lower the bottom bracket on your custom bike, make the bike more stable.
Yep, and we'll get into that later. But yeah, if you're just replacing, if you're going from a shorter crank on your current bike, you're going to get more pedal clearance.
It's also a good opportunity as a fitter to decide if you're going to have the rider ride flat on it or glute down it and adjust accordingly.
Right.
While you're changing the crank.
Right. And then also toe overlap is reduced on the smaller size frames. Even the frame I just designed for myself, I can still fight a little bit of toe overlap with today's 29er world. They're awful long tires. I don't know, was it 32 inch coming out, or I don't know, some newfangled thing. So how do we determine crank length? The optimum crank length. That's maybe why most of us are here. What is my number? How many millimeters do I need? How do we find that? I do not mean to disappoint you, but there isn't an optimum crank length for you. But there probably is a good range. It's a spectrum thing. So if you can ride a 155, I guarantee you can ride a 154, and it's not gonna kill you one way or the other. With crank length, there's a bit more of a hard upper limit where going too long is going to have a bad effect, whereas going too short is there's not much ill effect to going too short. So it's a lot harder to go too short, but the second you get too long, your body starts moving in ways that isn't helpful, and the stuff's going to go downhill quicker for you. So how do you figure out crank length? Jokes aside, the best way is probably to go to I call it an observational bike fit. Someone intimately familiar with the human anatomy, how everything works. We have Happy here, who's the godfather of bike fitting, a medical bike fitter extraordinaire. Has worked in labs with millions of dollars of camera and equipment and stuff that only people could dream of, and he still just uses his eyes to determine where you need to sit. And a tape measure. Okay, so you do use some technology with a tape measure. You don't necessarily want a computer fitting you, which with a lot of, not that technology is bad, but if that is the driving force and not observation, it tends to just put you in a position where a lot of people are. A common position, it averages out. Someone who's really just looking at you and all of your unique things about you is going to put you where you need to be. One thing that we looked at was knee and hip angles. Those can kind of be limiting factors for people once you get to too closed of a knee, too much flex. That can start limiting you, and there are some numbers that you can put to that. I had some in that slide. There were kind of red, green, yellow areas where you're more likely to have knee pain at a longer length, less likely. These are better than, and the same with, there's calculations, formulas, percentages that you can use for your height, your inseam, your tibia length. These are fine things. They're not the best. It's not seeing like the best bike fitter in the world, but it's better than whatever came on your bike. I can guarantee you that. And maybe it tells you that you're close, and that's great. Lots of people are riding too long of cranks, and they do just fine without problem, and that's fine. It's kind of how far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? It's important to remember, yeah.
Remember, the numbers you're measuring are subject to change. This
Yes.
body changes over the course of days,
Mm-hmm.
never mind weeks, months, or years. You can lose 4.5 between bedtime and wake up in spinal cord length.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me what number is your sweet spot, and I'll tell you.
Yes. Yes. There's once you get into measuring and numbers and calculations, it's a suggestion. Well, everything is a suggestion, but it's not, I'm trying to convey, it's not something to live or die by, but it's like, okay, maybe you measure your inseam length, 20% of that, it says 145. So it's like, okay, well, maybe I could at least go down to 165, for my next crank, just to, maybe I'm way off, maybe I'm not. For me personally, one formula puts me at 170 and one puts me at 155. So which one do you choose? I would go with the lower. So they kind of work, they kind of don't, but they get you in the right direction. And it's better than the 170s that came on your bike, probably.
Be bold. If you don't go noticeable, they don't notice. If you go from 170 to 165, half the people aren't good to notice any improvement. But if you go from a 170 to a 155, I guarantee you they will feel the difference.
Yes.
And if you go back to their old bike, to the old crank, they're going to feel it.
In my experience, you will perceive a very, very small change. You can go down 2.5 millimeters, 5 millimeters, and your body, you will feel like you're on a clown bike spinning a tiny little circle, even though it's only that much smaller. But give it a few rides, give it a week, and you probably won't notice much. And you'll think, well, this wasn't worth going down to a shorter crank. Then you go back to your other bike with longer cranks, and you may find that it is not fun to ride anymore. You get much more of more of a surprise going, once you get used to shorter cranks a little bit, going back to your old bike is a really great test. Does that feel bad, or does that feel good to go longer? And I found most of the time, it's very natural for you to, once you get used to the new feeling, to go shorter. And the real shocker, the real disgust happens when you go back to 175 or something that you found out is too long for you. Let's see. So that's kind of the crank length side of things. We're almost done, and we can do questions later. I also want to touch on kind of the frame building side of things, of how crank length can affect geometry and design when you're building a bike from scratch. So I would argue that all of the bikes today are built around crank length, 100%. It's just all the same crank length, so you don't see a lot of those differences. And you really see the disadvantages of designing around crank length on smaller size bikes, maybe medium and down. Extra large size bikes, I don't really have much problem generally with the fit. But the smaller you get, the worse the geometries are for smaller riders because the cranks are so long. So some of the things that you can change and design around when you're building a custom frame, bottom bracket drop is a easy one. So you use a shorter crank. So now I like to look at your pedal height off the ground. So if you shorten your crank an inch, now your pedal's an inch off the ground if you don't change your bottom bracket height. So you can drop that bottom bracket height on the bike, and now you're kind of sitting back where you were relative to the ground. Saddle fore aft, so sliding your seat on the rails or the seat tube angle. You're shortening your crank, so it's possible that now you can also slide your seat back. You don't have to, but it's something to keep in mind when you're designing. With a shorter crank, you can have a shorter top tube because you'll have less toe overlap. All these, it's hard because all of these things are like very related. You change top tube length and you also change toe overlap, and like everything moves all together on a bike. And then again, you want to maintain that seat height from the pedal to the top of the seat is kind of the last point. So what prompted me to start building the cranks for myself was I was very excited building a bike for my wife, who's relatively short, and I found I was telling her, and she doesn't really care, it's so amazing, I can like shorten the top tube, and now you don't have any toe overlap, and you have all these things, and it's such a better bike than like this stock bike that's very similar. And I was like, so amazing, and if only we had shorter cranks. She's like, well, just make them. And I was like, okay, maybe I should. And that's kind of how I got here. So that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions, concerns. I have some prompts if you want to learn more about that stuff, but I think we still have a bit of time. So yeah, I saw you first.
Yeah, thanks. So it's probably related to gearing and knee pain. So earlier I heard you talking about knee pain is reduced, I think because the knee is not bent as far.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't have to go to that extreme angle.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking about maybe the force needed on the pedal, right? So I don't have a degree in carbon fiber.
You don't need to, yeah.
I know that torque, force times distance, you shorten distance. In order to have the same amount of torque, you got to increase force.
Right.
So it's kind of like gearing. So how does that relate? I mean, do you end up putting more force down, but it doesn't hurt your knee because it's not at such an extreme angle, right? You're not squatting.
Right. You're taking one thing and just putting it over here.
Yeah.
So this is where it gets complicated. Yes, in a physics world, if we look through a physics lens, yes, you need to produce more force per pedal stroke to maintain that same amount of torque. People love, what about leverage? Leverage doesn't win bike races. So one simple thing that you could do is shift to an easier gear and spin at a higher cadence.
That's the answer.
And that equals it all out.
Okay.
That's like a really simple solution. One that people don't like to hear is that you might get stronger. You might be able to just push harder.
And you wouldn't suffer from that because it's not doing that pushing at that extreme angle?
Typically, yes. I would say the body adapts.
Yeah.
The body adapts. So one good point to make is we are not an engine. We are not like a car engine where if you reduce the length of something, you are reducing power output by that same percentage. Power comes from within our body. We are a complex system of imperfect levers and all this stuff. It doesn't account, an engine produces perfect round torque like throughout the whole cycle. We don't. We're just stomping down. And there's something too, if you can start, you reduce that dead spot and you can have a smoother pedal stroke, maybe reduce peak force, but it's over a longer time. Maybe that all evens out. Maybe that saves you more energy in the long run. It gets very complicated.
Okay.
So it's my point is that it's not it doesn't 100% follow and is limited by the physics as we think of it. Oh, I don't know who. I think I saw you had a question before. I'm sorry if we don't get everyone or go in order, but go ahead.
Particularly with racing's influence on bikes, where everything's so dialed in, these measurements are so perfect. Why has this been so overlooked? And do you think people are finally going to catch on to this?
Well, we'll see. I mean, if I do my job, they probably will. I think part of the, now I'm not a historian, this is just an opinion. Historically, producing cranks, you're basically stamped out of metal from really big expensive molds, really big expensive machines, and to get your 170, 172.5, 175, they're literally taking that same piece of metal and drilling a hole in 3 different places, and those are your sizes. Because it's very expensive to produce, if you were to produce a 165, 55, 145, that would triple your costs. And for whatever reason, however we got to 170 as kind of the normal thing, maybe it was, a bunch of tall Europeans that designed it and it worked for them. And I don't know but I think that's part of it, and it worked. The body is amazing, and you can pedal too big of a crank, and that's all you know. So that's just what we do, and it's less than ideal, but there's never any option for it. Maybe it's too complicated to change the whole frame geometry system and the way we build bikes and all that stuff to really make it happen. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, more small thing. When it comes to crank length, let's say you go for a shorter crank length, does that favor lighter gearing or does it encourage heavier gearing?
Generally, you're going to want to go for easier gearing. You're typically, and this is again, if you want it to, your cadence will naturally go up, but you don't have to pedal faster. Most bikes have gears, and you can pick and choose your gear. But yeah, generally speaking, if you shorten a crank, your cadence will go up, and you're typically might want an easier gear. You're going up a 15% grade hill, you are going to be applying more force at the same cadence with a short crank versus a longer crank.
So I mean, maybe a longer cog, maybe a bigger diameter cog in the rear.
Yep, or a smaller one in the front can help. Again, you might just get stronger, and that's okay. Or you might just pedal a few RPM lower.
No, the real thing, I mean, you went shorter because your knees told you so.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be a matter of what my knees will tell me.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, they'll tell you. Yeah.
So is it on the implementation end? Who makes shorter cranks, and what do you do about compatibility with front derailleurs? If you don't buy it from Shimano,
Yeah.
how's it going to be compatible with your Shimano derailleur?
Well, it's difficult for me to speak to other manufacturers and how they deal with that. With my cranks, they're modular. I have different spiders, and each part you can kind of Lego it together, so to speak. So for Shimano in particular, I have a Shimano spider. So you can put your Shimano chain rings on the Shimano spider that I sell, and you might need to adjust your front derailleur just 0.5 millimeter here and there, and you might not.
That's okay, but you make yours with different interfaces with chain.
Yep,
So you can
yep.
choose the chain.
A few select.
Yeah.
I don't do every. Do I do the SRAM one? And people say, do you have a SRAM spider? And I say, which SRAM road spider? There's many. But yeah, other brands might do something similar or have different, or maybe you have to buy their chain rings and you can't use Shimano chain rings. That's something you'd have to investigate depending on the brand of crank that they.
Just look at this picture, like a one by, and you can make it however you want.
Yeah. Yep. 2-bys get a little more complicated, but yeah, when I designed it for maximum versatility. The 1-by is like a new thing I just started just now. Otherwise, everything I've sold so far has always been spidered, so you always have chain rings that you can put on. You can put them on the outside of the spider, the inside of the spider. It's very versatile. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go.
In the 1970s, I think it was, there was an Italian study that it was titled with a acronym, CONI, and it had to do with setting up racing bike geometry and fit for elite riders.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a Bible for race builders. And I wondered, when you talked about the optimal angles between hip and knee at the beginning of your speech, I thought, all right, that's the gateway to figuring out how I individually would reckon what my best crank length might be. And I thought, the architecture of the leg varies immensely. My tibia is different than yours, and so on. And I wondered if anybody compiled a database where they measured thousands of legs, and then you could come up with an optimal mechanical or physics power generation at, say, 57 degrees for Pete's leg dimensions, and then everybody else could figure out what their dimensions are and apply it. And that would give you a starting point, of all things being the same. So then you could say, all right, that looks like 57 degrees is optimal for me, but now I have to add in all my other idiosyncrasies. But that would get me down the road much farther than anything else. That would be a good basis, right? Has anybody ever done that kind of a study?
Happy will probably give you a better answer in a second, but I mean, basically what you're asking for is, like the numbers and suggestions I've provided. People have done some work.
I saw a range
to,
there. I'm just wondering if dial in more than a range.
What is dialed though? You want 57.231 degrees and.
No, I'm not asking for that kind of decimal point accuracy.
Yeah.
But I'm asking for the specificity based on each individual's leg parameters.
Yeah, you could fit someone, put them on what you think is a correct crank length, and then just measure them. And I guess that would.
Surely there's an angle that maximizes the mechanical strength of that lever system.
Not really. No.
You're missing too much other things.
There's more to it than angles.
Yeah.
If we were machines, yes, absolutely, but we're not. What's the doctor, whatever, did the study at 140? He tested one. Jim Martin did a big study.
Peak power is between 1 and 5 on the clock face.
It's between 1 and 5 on the clock face. He tested, I think it was something 120 millimeter, 145, all the way up to 220 millimeter cranks, peak power. He found that between 145 and 175, there was no statistical difference between peak power. I've done a similar test of 1 minute power just on myself, so it's not a big scientific study. I showed 2% difference between 135 and 175.
Your problem is you're assuming the starting point you're picking is the right starting point, and the consequences of your action are all in physics. The problem is there's other mechanisms in your body that we're not looking at. I look at air exchange and vascular return in the pedal stroke. If I can increase the efficiency.
If he's saying if you might find 175, maybe 175s are great, but you can't breathe.
Yeah.
So what good is it out on the road when you're climbing if you can't breathe? You're gonna lose more than you're gonna lose 15% of your speed if you're choking yourself because you have too long of a crank.
You're also doing anaerobic earlier, which means your recovery period starts then in the middle of the race. If we can hold off anaerobic function.
So basically crank length can affect physiological systems in your body.
Right, well, it sounds like, in essence,
So-
the dynamic variability of all these factors have intense overlap. And I was assuming there would be enough separation that you could say, well, let's maximize mechanical effect, and then we'll bring into the play of, oh, you're glute dominant or quad dominant, or all the other idiosyncrasies, and
Yeah,
keep moving forward.
I would say it's the body it's really complicated and frustrating. Yeah, that it is. You're feeling it. We're probably all feeling it. So I'm sorry I don't have like the answer, but I don't think there is one answer.
Embrace the complication.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question about looking for dead spots when you're pedaling.
Yeah.
When you're fitting somebody on a bike, how do you look for dead spots while you're pedaling?
Well, I know for sure that it doesn't matter what crank length you have. No matter what it is, you're gonna have a dead spot. You're
You can put out of 1 foot, pedal one somewhere.
But yeah, your muscle, I never realized this, your muscles are going from contracting to lengthening as you go over the top of the pedal stroke. And when you're going from one to the other, there's always going to be a dead spot there. Short cranks typically can, I would say, shorten the length of that dead spot. So you'll have less dead band. So maybe if you're on too long of a crank, between 11 and 1, you can't really do much. You can't push effectively. But with a shorter crank, that might narrow up and you can start your downstroke applying effective power a little bit sooner.
Also do orbital chain rings, which make the gearing less at the top and greater when you have the mechanical advantage.
With oval chain rings? Yeah. About oval chain rings, I was like, part of my crank pain journey was I did oval chain rings for many, many, many years. And it wasn't until recently I got off of oval chain rings. And now that I'm on a very appropriately sized crank, I did not notice the oval or miss it at all. So I think the oval chain rings, in my personal, uneducated opinion, my one personal example, oval chain rings make up for too long of a crank. In a similar way to just help you get over the top. I think you had a question?
I thought you were the company that sold or rented the crank arms that had like 5 different.
Yep, that's me. Yeah.
Yeah, you rent them, you try them.
Yep.
You know, your favorite spot, you then buy that like.
Yeah.
Do you have a picture of those?
That's a good.
When I saw.
I have one in my booth, 2904. Upstairs. Yeah, I don't believe I do. Oh, what was it? I don't. Oh, there we go. Yeah.
That's clever.
Yeah.
You can find the sweet spot somehow with that, right?
It,
Seat height, setback.
Sweet spots don't exist. There's no such thing as a sweet spot. That just becomes a point where you're putting more stress for an extended period of time. You need to move on the saddle and not sit in one place.
there may be a sweet range, but hopefully trying different crank lengths will at least open your eyes as to what doesn't work, or maybe what does.
Hopefully it'll allow you to find your sweet range.
Yeah, a sweet range is what we're, yeah.
Well, just using a single speed bicycle as an example,
Yeah.
is there a relationship between the crank arm length and the gearing itself?
So-
In an extreme and a scientific approach to that.
Yeah, I mean that narrows it down. So yeah, let's say if you were to shorten your crank 10 millimeters, 6%, then through a physics lens, you would reduce your gear 6%.
Making it easier?
You would make it, yeah, you shorten the crank, so you would make your gear easier. So then your leg is producing the same amount of force.
But you're also saying that because of all the other variables in your body, that's really not anything that you're going to see or feel.
It depends on the person. I wouldn't say, if you're considering crank length, you're looking at going down 10%. You can't find gearing that's 10% lower. Try to just use what you have. Try to use your chain rings that you have. You don't have to do everything at once. Maybe you go ride for 6 months and you're like, man, the shorter cranks, I like them, but when I'm climbing, I just need a lower gear. Go then look for a lower gear. But like, I try to encourage people not to cause it's a big thing that can change if you want it to. And I try to encourage people just see how it goes. When I was young, riding 172.5s, younger, I rode at 105, 110 RPM cadence, all of the time. Now I ride 145s and I'm at a 90 RPM cadence. I've gotten much stronger. And I'm just a very different rider, and that's going the opposite of physics, what physics should tell us. So.
My head around is I have customers that want to be at a very specific gear ratio.
Yep.
And how am I going to make a crank length recommendation and still keep them at that ratio without having to experiment with.
Yeah. Well, for single speed, I would say the investment in changing gears is fairly minimal. So yeah, go 2 teeth down, or you can do 17 divided by 15 and see what that percentage is, and see if that roughly correlates, and then you can say it's relatively the same gear, just sort of translated into a different crank length.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If we're on average using longer and desirable crank arm lengths, aren't we being penalized, at least at the elite level, with weight savings, rotational inertia, and aerodynamics? Wouldn't be penalized a little bit in all three of those areas?
Yeah.
So I guess at the level, they're always looking for grams, savings those a few grams. Why wouldn't they have zeroed in on this at all?
I don't know. Well, opinion piece. What I see is one way to get around long cranks is to shove you really far forward. And I think much of the pro peloton is way too far forward, fore aft. So, and a lot of that is because they have too long of cranks and their backs are horizontal to the ground. They're getting super air. I mean, good for them. But you could also be horizontal, shift back a little bit behind the bottom bracket, use shorter cranks, and still be relatively in a similar position. I don't have a great answer as to why the the world, the crank length world is the way it is. It
I mean, there are
is sort of frustrating when you see it. Yeah.
So even a few millimeters on a couple crank arms is a little bit of weight savings.
I mean,
They're not beyond looking.
I'm also a pretty staunch believer that the pros are not necessarily, pros should not be influencing what you and I are riding. They're a completely different breed. They're doing it for a living, putting their bodies, they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing to their bodies, but it's their job, so they can choose to do that. And they're not well educated, and there is a lot of historical baggage, and I think crank length is just one of those things that always has been. There are other things like that in cycling. It's a historic sport. We glorify the good old days, and it isn't just a purely the Tour de France. As much as they'd like to say that marginal gains is everywhere, it's not. There's still, we're taking some.
Koch is on 165, so it shows you he's already gone to that limit.
Yeah, he's at the limit. Yeah. Let's see.
He's not short.
Put out two things doesn't apply to a lot of people. Leg length discrepancy and range of motion on one leg. If it's on both legs, shorter. But leg length discrepancy and range of motion on one leg.
So.
Leg length discrepancy.
Yeah, I would say generally a leg length discrepancy you would want to shim. If one leg is shorter than the other, an answer might be to shim it and to keep.
It only works at one extreme and it screws up the other extreme.
The question is it a functional difference or is it a structural difference?
Size.
Both are size, but the question is in the bones immeasurable or is it rotation?
Well, range of motion limitation means the leg can't bend and
So the range of motion, it depends where the range of motion is limited. If your range of motion is limited if you can't reach the bottom of the pedal stroke with one leg, then that would change if you would want the same or different lengths as if you can't get over the top.
You have to look at ankle, knee, and hip, which is a separate function to figure out where the difference is, to figure out how you're going to treat it.
But yeah, we got 2 minutes left, so let's, yeah.
Okay, I have two quick questions. One is I'm really concerned about accessibility, like price-wise, of bike stuff and like getting people on stuff that works well. Your cranks are like $500 US, and I'm definitely going to be buying one. So
Yeah.
How, as an industry, can we help your great ideas trickle down quickly to like people who aren't buying $500 US cranks? And the second question is about oval chain rings, which is if they were helping you with the crank length that was too long, would they not help you also in the shorter crank length? Let's start with the first question first.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how to change an industry. I mean, I'm a one-man show making my own cranks, and they're machined 5 miles from my house, so that's kind of the cost that it takes to live and and do all that. And I guess that's capitalism could drive price down, I guess, if more people do it or volumes are higher. Oval, I mean, it can help some people, it can hurt others. I don't know that it's a magic bullet. And if it is a magic bullet between oval and round, if the difference between oval and round is pain and no pain, there's something else going on that you should be able to ride either one, pain-free, I guess. We got one more? Yeah. Oh yeah.
How you found that to be and how other people have?
It depends. You know, the only thing you need to do is adjust your saddle height accordingly. Some people find that they might want to translate their position back as well. You don't have to. You move your saddle back to accommodate some of that. Now you're increasing your reach to your stem. You need to decrease your stem length. You might need to increase the stem height. So it starts getting more and more complicated, and that's okay. But kind of like I've suggested before, I would just try it with a raised saddle and see how it goes. And if you find that you need to change other things, then you can as you adapt and progress. But it's a different, when you shorten cranks, a lot of things change, and it might surprise you that now you can ride in what was once your optimum position is not your optimum position anymore. Things change. When you change something, things change, if that makes sense.
And
So.
the other thing I'd say about short is, like, you didn't touch upon today, but if you go with a more aft cleat position, your foot feels more like where it's used to be, because you're preserving that heel or pedal swivel. And that also opens up hip and knee angles opens up hip angle by going further back.
Yep.
And in terms of saddle height, but
Yeah. So yeah.
it's like stance width, foot rotation, shimming, wedging. Like, so it's a lot more complicated because there's 5 adjustments you can make on the cleat alone. So unless you look at that stuff, the crank length is the heart of it, but then your immediate connection is the cleat. So you look at that even before you look at saddle height, because your cleat position is controlling your saddle height as well. And if you go
it's all
then you don't have to lift your seat as much.
right. Yeah, it's all connected. It's all a spider web, and we're all just, you pull one part of a spider web and everything else moves a little bit as well, and that's what it is. But I think that's our hour. So if you have more questions, come find me in my booth. I'm happy to talk more. Thank you.